So hello everyone and welcome to my theory video about Mahoutsukai Yome or the Magus Prime. The question a lot of people have is, what is actually Elias Ainsworth? How is he existing? How was he created? What's his backstory and so on, right? And so for the last episode in anime, I think we can now then assume what he is. So he's a monster that they always tell about. It's a monster that's trying to be human, or is it a human trying to be a monster, right? Is it a faerie? Is it a human? Back and forth. So what we see in this flashback is that we see Lindel finding Elias up in Northern Scandinavia. I was assumed by Lindel's clothes, and Lindel takes to his master, also gives Elias name and so on, right? And she quite specifically tells us that Elias is not a human who has tried to turn into a faerie. Talk about using dark magic to becoming a faerie, or learning, transform into a monster, something like that, right? And she also somewhat implicitly tells us that it is probably not as well a faerie trying to be human. She's actually kind of like diffused both of those ideas people had, I would say generally, that it's either a human, transform herself to a monster, right, or back and forth. So what I hear from this then is that my conclusion then is that he actually is a fusion. So my idea of this is that Elias is a human and a faerie creating the same body. So that would make him a blend of both human, right, and faerie properties. And that's why no one really knows what he actually is. And people keep telling that, oh, he's kind of human, or he's kind of a faerie. And I think that makes me at least. And so given that, I have a further base theory then why it happened. So when I see his blood thing, red thing, I am thinking of the seal pact, or the familiar pact of Chise and Root. So we know that if you have a familiar and the familiar is close to you and yada yada, right, if the familiar dies, you also die, and vice versa. So I would imagine then that in the very, very past history, Elias was a mage, or not Elias then, but the human form of Elias was a mage, having a soul pact, right, a familiar pact with its familiar, and that either one of them is gonna die, or maybe both of them, probably one of them, and they then fuse the bodies together to heal themselves, and that also then of course would also diffuse the whole, like, if you die, I die, and so on. And that's what he remembered, this blood and red kind of imagery, which is a very similar color scheme to the transformation we saw, as I mentioned, with Chise and Root. So that's kind of my theory. I think that Elias is a fusion out of a human and a familiar to save either of one's lives, and guessing probably that Elias could be the most ancient mage ever done. Something like that, right? Probably older than the Lindel and maybe his master then. But also then, maybe fusing their memory and so on, he lost all his memories, right? He lost his body. And that also makes sense because we have that Root now has the memory of Chise's mother, right? He has the memories of her backstory. So what happens then if you take these two, a familiar and a mage, and mixes their memories and souls together, maybe they have no memory. I think that also comes back to the whole memory and it's the whole soul pact thing. This is my short theory video about what is actually Elias Ainsworth. I think it makes the most sense also on a narrative sense, that he is probably some lost loved one, right? Like the familiar also was his wife or something like that, and they have to fuse to survive or something. It just feels like a very classic narrative thing there, that probably would be with Chise's power, she can help him like truly remember that mix of memory and so on. Anyway, I would love to hear what your comments about this, what you think is bright or not. I do believe this is what's gonna be, something like that. Maybe not necessarily that it's his familiar, but that it is at least a faerie combined with a human, as the very specific told us that it's neither of the one trying to be the other one, but it's a blend of something. So I think the future part, at least, I feel quite confident in that theory.